As to the homeworks, I keep forgetting to mention the homework. As I'm talking about something, I'm thinking, oh, that's going to be the homework. And then by the end of class, I don't remember that that was supposed to be homework. But basically, we're still with compassion, great compassion, focusing on the impermanence of sentient beings as well as on the emptiness of sentient beings. So I guess you can pick and choose. All right. But in order to generate the right kind of motivation for, well, making the material most beneficial, making what we're going through most beneficial, we focus, of course, on great compassion, very important. But I guess when we say great compassion, initially, and I've said that a few times, but just to remind you, we won't be able to get into the suffering of change and the pervasive condition suffering. We won't be able to get into that right away. I mean, it's just not part of anything we reflect on usually. So it's the suffering of sentient beings, and there's plenty. There's so much suffering in this world, so reflecting on that. Physical suffering, of course. We may even want to take it to the different realms, which is a little more difficult, but it doesn't harm. Just consider the possibility that there is life in different realms of existence that we just can't perceive, we just can't see. I usually think it's easier to think along the lines that everything we perceive is totally subjective. That's very much what the Chittamatra school tells us, the Svatantika school tells us as well, that whatever we perceive is dependent on our mind, on an appearance to our mind. Therefore, when we talk, for instance, what is it? When we talk about, for instance, how do we perceive a bowl filled with liquid? A bowl filled with liquid, you remember? It comes up in this text. A bowl that is filled with liquid, like this glass filled with liquid. That we perceive it as water, but beings in the different realms have a different perception of it. If they do perceive a liquid in the first place, but let's assume 3 different beings look at this glass and they perceive liquid, but depending on where these beings were reborn, what realm they belong to, we perceive water, then a preta being perceives pus and blood, while a celestial being perceives nectar. So that shows there may be a common kind of basis there. Maybe. Maybe not. I mean, some beings don't perceive anything. A third being or a fourth being may not perceive anything in this place. But in the case of these 3 beings, there's some liquid there, but it's perceived totally differently. So what is actually there? Well, all are there. Based on the kind of karma we've accumulated, we perceive different things. So it is a valid object, it does exist, but it's still completely subjective. And therefore, when people ask, well, what about the different realms? Are they symbolic, for instance? No, there is a symbolism, where there's a symbolic way to look at them. But in general, I mean, symbolic in the sense we can say there's hell on earth, there's hell in the human realm, there's a preta existence in the human realm. But that's just similar to what's actually there. Now, if there were objective places, if there were actual subjective places that you're reborn in, then it would be weird. So where's the hellish existence located? Usually they do say down in the earth. But I think that's just for people who have a hard time imagining it. It's kind of laid down somewhere in the ground. This is where you have these hellish experiences. Up in the sky, but that's just because we talk about upper and lower realms. So pointing at a physical place. But in actuality, it's happening right here where we are. There are these parallel worlds happening. I don't think that's the same as the parallel universe people talk about. No, but there are parallel worlds that some of them may perceive each other, right? Human and animal, and some no. And since our existence is totally subjective, I mean, my own personal life is absolutely subjective. None of you, I mean, parts of that you experience, I mean, we experience together here in this room, but the moment I leave and I go back to my room, unless you have the same way home, there may be some similar experience up to the way when we part ways. And from then onwards, it's totally uniquely my experience. And the same is true for you from getting up to going to sleep every night. It's totally subjective. Even right now, where you're sitting at this point in time, you have a different perspective. You don't sit in the same spot. So you don't even see the same. I don't see the same as you do, none of you. And therefore, just from that perspective, it's totally subjective. And so why not? Why is it impossible that there are beings who share less of the same karma? We share similar karma with each other. And therefore we may have similar experiences. But then those who are very different, have accumulated different karmic actions in the past, they have very different experiences. And we may not be able to perceive them. Right? Just as there are people on the other end of the world, we don't perceive them unless we travel there or they come where we live. We never have any idea of how they live. Okay, so this could be remedied by just going there, of course. But in the case of other realms, there's really no logical reason why they aren't any. Except I haven't seen it. I can't see them. Or scientists don't see them. But that's not a correct logical reason, is it? There's so much we don't see, and there's so much science still doesn't know. I mean, 500 years from now, I'm pretty sure if they look back at what scientists knew right now, they'd laugh about it. But somehow we have this sense science knows everything, except scientists wouldn't claim that. Yeah. Anyway, so considering this, oh, right, there's so many other states of existence, and it's so much worse. It can be also a lot better, but that's also a problem. Who wants to experience that bliss of the celestial realms? Honestly, just using up all your positive potential. It's like you saved money for so long in the bank and you spend it in a few days. It's all gone. Right? Yeah, who would want to... That's like positive karma is actually like capital that helps us, that gives us more freedom in the sense to reach, to accomplish what we wish for, right? Anyway, so thinking of these different realms and how much suffering there is. And even if you have a hard time with that, just in the human realm, there's enough. So much fear, well, physical pain, of course, pain, sickness, aging, death. But on top of that, all the mental pain, all the worry. Oh, Kumbela, do you want to sit here? Sorry. There's a space waiting for you. Anyway, so in that way, thinking of sentient beings, let's just focus on that for a moment. Just get a sense of that. And then I'll say a little bit more about just having this mind and this body, of course, and the impermanence of that, so that we're able to wish for sentient beings, not just to be free from the suffering of suffering, but also of any kind of samsaric experience. And we take it from there to generate bodhicitta. All right, let's do this together. reason for sentient beings experiencing so much suffering is, of course, having the 5 aggregates. Having a body and mind controlled by mental afflictions. Making lasting satisfaction impossible. With even our happy experiences, being seen by an arhat or a liberated being as a dissatisfactory state in comparison to what they experience. So let's therefore generate great compassion in the form of thinking, may all sentient beings be free from any dissatisfactory state, and may I be able to protect them, may I be able to help them overcome all these dissatisfactory experiences together with their causes. Aspiration then grows stronger and gives way to the altruistic resolve that is now determined to do whatever we can to work towards helping sentient beings overcome their dissatisfactory experiences and their causes. Since for that we have to first attain the enlightened state of the Buddha, let's then generate bodhicitta, the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So without letting go of that mind, let's recite the prayers. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger, that holds some close and others distant. Last time we asked a further question. Well, we answered two questions, or I answered two questions. She asks also, is compassion that explicitly holds sentient beings in any of the wrong modes of apprehension still a virtuous mind and creates positive karma? All right. That holds sentient beings. I don't think that such a compassion exists. Compassion that holds sentient beings in any of the wrong mode of apprehension. How is that possible? Remember, we talked about the mode of apprehension, or the apprehensive aspect. That usually refers to the main object, simply spoken. So if you have great compassion focuses on all sentient beings and wishes them to be free from suffering. So that absence of suffering, that's the main object. Okay? It's apprehended, the mind holds on to it, but it wouldn't hold in any wrong way. It wouldn't at the same time hold on to sentient beings being permanent, or I don't know what else, partners, independent, or being self-sufficiently existent. It wouldn't do that. It's a correct mind. Well, of course, it's not a correct mind as such, because not all sentient beings are free from suffering, but it generates that wish, and therefore we can say it's a beneficial mind. It's a correct mind. It's actually a correct mind. It's not a wrong mind, even though its object actually doesn't exist. But it doesn't perceive, it's not a wrong consciousness in any way. So there's no other apprehension other than freedom of suffering for all sentient beings. Yes?
Yesterday you said that you could have like great compassion.
Yes.
At the same time, the mind holding sentient beings as truly existent.
Yes, that is true. So that's the next point. So, but she says, is compassion that explicitly holds sentient beings in any of the wrong ways. So the way she put the question is as if compassion itself were to apprehend sentient beings in the wrong way. But as you said correctly, yeah, absolutely. When it comes to another mind running at the same time that perceives sentient beings in the wrong way, that's true. That's possible. So in the same way as we have a correct mind that runs parallel, you can have a mind that realizes all sentient beings, that all sentient beings are impermanent, running parallel to great compassion. You can have a wrong consciousness. Why not? For instance, I told you about one of the commentaries we study, and there it's very clear you can have bodhicitta that focuses on becoming enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, and at the same time you have holding on to true existence of, for instance, inherent existence or true existence of enlightenment, your own enlightenment. That's possible. Now, are these two minds conjoined? The great compassion in the case of the first example. So you have great compassion that runs parallel with a mind that perceives sentient beings as existing inherently. Are those two conjoined? Remember what I said about being conjoined. What does it mean to be conjoined? What's the meaning of two minds being conjoined? Simultaneously? Well, if they're directly conjoined, they exist simultaneously in the same person's mind. They're both mental consciousnesses, and they are both active at the same time. But what about being conjoined? Strengthening each other. So great compassion, does it strengthen ignorance? Does ignorance strengthen great compassion? No. So they have to enhance each other. They have to strengthen each other to be conjoined with one another. which is why in this case, where you have great compassion and ignorance operating at the same time in a person's continuum, you wouldn't say that they're conjoined. Simply, the word is simply not used in that way. It's used to say that they strengthen each other or enhance each other, and that's not happening. But can they still run parallel? Yes. Can it influence great compassion in a negative way? I guess you could say yes. I mean, it's still virtues, but to give you another example, or to ask you, I have to ask you first of all, is it possible to generate virtuous karma based on ignorance? Yeah, right? Of course. An example would be?
Practicing generosity.
Practicing generosity based on
The mistaken mind, seeing the object of your generosity as inherent.
yeah, very good. Seeing the beggar, for instance, seeing the person who's begging as existing inherently or permanently, being permanent, existing inherently, and then based on that, generating even compassion and wishing and giving something to them.
Or doing it as a role.
Pardon?
Or doing it as a role. The rule is you give to beggars, in certain, so it's sort of an ignorance, really.
Right. I mean, first of all, being seen as generous, doing it out of pride, wanting to be popular or seen as a great practitioner, for instance, or focusing on an inherent I, wishing for that inherent I to get merit, right? And thirdly, yes, the object is seen, or even that which is given, that which is given to, the act of giving, seeing is as inherently existent, right? That's usually how we perceive things anyway. I mean, not all the time, of course, but we do believe that phenomena exist that way. So no surprise, we accumulate a lot of virtuous karma. We do a lot, I mean, in comparison to the negative karma, but we still accumulate virtue. And that is usually called, what kind of virtue is that? There's a word used, contaminated. It's contaminated virtue because it's influenced. It's like contaminate in the sense you bake a cake and you've got one rotten egg. So no matter how good the other ingredients are, the cake is contaminated. Or I don't know, you make that delicious lemonade and you pour in some tap water and it's contaminated, so the whole lemonade gets contaminated. It doesn't mean maybe it's still tasty, right? So it's still virtuous. However, one of its ingredients, one of its aspects is negative. Yeah, so but that doesn't mean, or negative, well, you wouldn't even say it's neutral. In this case, the ignorance is neutral. The ignorance it's a neutral kind of mind. So in general, ignorance is neutral, the mind that misperceives reality. It's neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Can't be virtuous. It can give rise to a virtuous action. Yeah. Anyway, so therefore is compassion that explicitly holds sentient beings in any of the wrong modes of apprehension still a virtuous mind? Yes, even if it runs parallel with that. I mean, I used the example of a cause, like the instigator, that which gives rise to compassion, or in the case of generosity, which gives rise to generosity, but it works the same way. You have a sense of all sentient beings existing inherently, their suffering exists inherently, and you generate compassion. Possible. Even great compassion. Right? I mean, what makes you think? What is a huge argument? Oh, I don't think you can answer that, but let's try. An argument for the fact that there are sentient beings who actively, even from the point of view of their philosophy, perceive inherent existence, accept inherent existence, and still they have great compassion, and even bodhicitta. Can you think of anyone like that? So far, we talked about...
Lama Tsongkhapa.
Pardon?
Lama Tsongkhapa.
Lama Tsongkhapa. Why Lama Tsongkhapa? Because he holds the Chittamatra view, but he's considered to be a bodhisattva. Okay, does he hold really the Chittamatra view? Yes, I think from the historical accounts. So yes, I guess you could say that exactly. So you were able to answer it. So those who follow a different philosophical view, for instance.
Like a Christian.
that's okay, that's the next step. But let's stick to the Buddhist first, and then we'll consider his question. So what about any of the other schools? Possible? Vaibhashika? Sautrantrika? Chittamatra? Svatantrika? Possible or not? Could they be bodhisattvas? Right? No? You remember we differentiate between two types of practitioners. Who are the two types of practitioners? Those of lower capacity, lower mental capacity, and those of sharper mental capacity, right? So of sharper mental capacity, they're those practitioners who don't take anything on faith. We'll come to that, that's part of the text today. So there are those practitioners who don't take anything on faith. They're called those following reality. Which means if you tell them, well, cyclic existence is a problem, there's a root cause for all our suffering, which is the root misperception of reality, root ignorance. If you remove that and get out of samsara, they don't take it on faith. They first want to find out, is that true or not? They first want it, what do they have to understand? What do they have to realize? What do they have to come to know? Yes. Emptiness. They have to know emptiness. Why do they have to know emptiness?
Because they want to have proof that it's possible to become Buddha.
Yeah, but no. Even becoming liberated, now I'm talking about renunciation, right? First to generate renunciation. So how does it help you to understand emptiness? Why do you need to understand emptiness in order to generate renunciation? The wish to get out of samsara. Yes?
Because only when you understand how 12 links for samsara and how ignorance is the root of all suffering, and if you cut this specific type of ignorance related to reality, then the suffering will not.
Yeah, but why do you have to understand emptiness in order to understand ignorance can be removed?
So you can help the others perfectly?
Yes, but what's the exact relationship? You're right, but that doesn't mean, what is the relationship? I have to...
Removes ignorance.
But why does emptiness... how do I know that emptiness removes... the understanding of emptiness removes ignorance. How do I know that?
Well, when you've received it, then you find out. No. First we have to understand that ignorance is a wrong consciousness. We have to understand that ignorance is a wrong consciousness. That ignorance, its object is not in relation to reality. It's not in accordance with... it doesn't align with reality. That's most important. Right? How do I understand? How can I come to know that ignorance is a wrong consciousness? What do I have to understand? The right consciousness.
No. What do I have to understand? What do I have to realize? What do I have to come to understand?
Impermanence?
In order to understand that ignorance is a wrong consciousness. What does ignorance perceive?
Exactly. How do you know you're ignorant?
Inherent existence, first of all. Okay, so how do I know you're ignorant? Well, first of all, we have to learn about ignorance. We have to learn about emptiness, right? The first step is, in order to understand that my ignorance is a wrong consciousness, we learn about emptiness. We apply the reasonings, like we are introduced to emptiness. Does my self really exist the way it appears to me? Can the self be found? You engage in analysis, in meditation, reflection and meditation, and come to the conclusion it can't be found. If it's there, the closer we look,
the clearer it should become. Our sense of self. I mean, think about it. Our sense of self, when we start analyzing it, the hazier it gets. It doesn't become clearer, right? If we search for anything else, I search for a book, just in normal terms. If the book was on my table, I would find it. The closer I look, the more I look, the more obvious it would become to me that this book is on my table. The same should apply to the way we perceive the I, to this inherent I that we perceive. I'm not talking about the conventional I. We hold on to an inherent I, right? We constantly perceive this, we constantly, again and again, perceive an inherently existent I, which gives rise to self-centeredness. Therefore, if it's really there, we should be able to find it. We should be able to find an inherently existent table and so forth. And if we don't find it, well then we can come to the conclusion it doesn't exist, right? And if we understand it doesn't exist, well, that's the same as understanding emptiness. And then we can come to know that the mind, our mind that perceives inherent existence, is a wrong consciousness. Why? Because its main object doesn't exist. What does ignorance perceive? The inherent existence of about anything, the self or anything else. But if we come to the understanding that emptiness doesn't, inherent existence doesn't exist, in other words, we understand emptiness, we understand that the object of our ignorance doesn't exist. I gave you the example of, for instance, believing there's a snake in the cupboard. I said monster, but let's say a poisonous snake. You believe there's a poisonous snake in your cupboard, which gives rise to a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, right? Let's say you live in this room for a month on end and you have no key to the cupboard, but there's some cracks in there and you believe there's a snake inside. So it gives rise to a lot of emotional torment, whatever. Anyway, so once you open the cupboard and you check, is it here, is it there? If there's a snake, you should be able to find it. It's not like an endlessly big cupboard. It's just a place that you can check and come to the conclusion there is no snake. Which leads you to the understanding, you come to the understanding absence of snake. Which means you come to understand that your consciousness, your previous consciousness perceiving the existence of a snake or perceiving there to be a snake is a wrong consciousness, right? So what does your wrong consciousness perceive? The existence of a snake. Now you've realized the non-existence, and in that way you know you were wrong. Likewise, when you learn about liberation, for instance, the first step, first we learn about liberation. We're told there's ignorance is the root cause of everything. We're like, what ignorance? I mean, we're aware we have ignorance, but this particular ignorance, we have no clue. I mean, we believe it's a correct mind. So then we hear about emptiness, right? First, for the first time. So think of the person of greater spiritual capacity. So they hear about emptiness for the first time. They hear that this root ignorance, or our root ignorance, is responsible for everything else. And so first they need to understand emptiness. They won't be satisfied by just hearing this time and again, and it kind of makes sense, all right, let's go with it. No, they try to understand emptiness first. And then they know, okay, this ignorance is a wrong consciousness, right? It's a wrong consciousness. That's one thing, that's very important. That's what they have to understand. But secondly, what do they have to understand next? That it's responsible for all the other afflictions. So through mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is at the root of everything. Sometimes people feel it's not stressed enough in this tradition, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but actually it is. But it's almost like, it's so obvious. You don't need to talk about it all the time. It's like, of course, mindfulness. It's like for every meditation you need mindfulness. So with mindfulness, how do I get from ignorance to a mind that cherishes myself more than others? Well, from perceiving a particular kind of I. right? So look at your own mind. See, how do we get to anger, for instance? I'm angry with this person because they insulted me. This is something you need to play in your mind, or you need to go through it again and again. It doesn't help to just learn about it, or maybe intellectually understand how your neighbor gets to be angry, right? But rather, if you have the precious opportunity of losing your cool and get angry. Now, I'm not saying precious, but in the sense that this becomes your petri dish now, right? You sit down. Okay, I was angry. Why was I angry? Because this person insulted me. How does it feel? If they insulted the person you don't like, we'll be happy, right? The response could be, oh, I'm so happy, I'm so pleased. Finally, someone told this person the truth. But if it's directed at the self, it feels very different. How dare they say that? It's pretty obvious the I is very much involved. There's a strong sense of, why to me? Yeah. So to sit with this, go back just in time. All right, there's the anger. What preceded the anger? The sense of amazement. How can they say this to me? I am, right? The sense of I is pretty strong. That's the attachment to the I. I'm just more precious. If it happened to everyone else in the world, okay. But to me, that feels a lot worse, doesn't it? Doesn't it? It feels so much worse when it happens to us. So then to get a good sense of the I, okay, there's something there. Again, we end up saying there's something there. What it exactly is, we don't know. Well, no surprise, it doesn't exist. But that sense of like inherent, there's some inherent I. So that inherent I comes or was preceded by a mind. That may not be that obvious, but even just attachment itself, if we just look at that, a mind that holds on to ourselves and mine and considers that I to be more important. Right? It feels it's more important. It exaggerates its positive quality. It exaggerates its importance, basically. Right? That's what attachment does. It exaggerates. But that can only come about if there was previously a mind that perceived the self in the first place. And that is the root misconception. So going back, and the more we do this, the more obvious hopefully it becomes that the main perpetrator of all our afflictions is that root misperception. I mean, no one can blame us that we have self-centeredness, because that is a natural consequence from our perception of an inherent I. Right? An inherently existent I that is closer to my mind than your inherently existent I, that I also perceive, your inherently existent self. I perceive you to exist inherently. But my inherently existing self is closer to this mind, which leads to the sense this is more precious. So the first mind, the root mind, since it exaggerates in the sense, or it projects, let's put it that way. It projects. It doesn't deny the existence of something that actually exists. It doesn't deny anything that does in actuality exist. It superimposes a quality that doesn't exist. It superimposes inherent existence onto a conventional I. Does that make sense? That's really important to understand. That chain. First, it superimposes. Our mind labels I. First, it just labels I. Our mind labels, our conceptual mind labels, and there's no problem with that. But then the next step is the root misconception. It perceives that merely labeled I to exist beyond the labeling. As if it existed already before. It has its own inherent existence. And that misperception perceives an inherently existent I. Once we understand that is impossible, we understand that this is a wrong consciousness. And we understand, because of the meditation we did, that it gave rise to all the other afflictions. So if I want to get rid of my other afflictions, then I need to cut at the root. I don't really, I mean, I work with my anger. I can work with my anger if it's overwhelming, and it's a good idea to work with it, to generate patience, to develop patience. That's really important. But don't expect that to be a long-term solution. Patience will never get rid of your anger. It will only reduce it. It's very important because we will never understand emptiness if our anger is too strong. So it's important to generate patience, to generate generosity as an opposing word, as an antidote to greed, for instance. No, not greed. Well, what did I say? Oh, generosity, yes, as an antidote to greed. Patience as an antidote to anger. What else? Humility as an antidote to arrogance, right? Love as an antidote to hatred. So these are all important antidotes, but they're only short-term solutions. They can only reduce these afflictions for that long, but they can never totally eradicate them. Why not? Because their root is a misconception. As long as you have the root, the word root is used just as you have let's say, a poisonous tree. A poisonous tree that is such, as long as you just keep cutting away at its leaves, at its branches, even at its trunk, it keeps growing again, right? Our afflictions are like that. Our afflictions are like a poisonous tree that if you cut away at the trunk or the leaves or the branches, it'll regrow because the root hasn't been cut. If you want to get rid of that poisonous tree, you have to cut the root, and the root is the misconception of reality, that holding on to inherent existence, that mind. That's why you have to realize emptiness in order to get rid of all our afflictions, because it has to be in opposition to the root. If the root were something else, if the root of all our suffering were a mind that perceives the impermanence of things, we mainly have to realize the impermanence of things. If hypothetically the root of all our trouble were the misconception perceiving the I or anything else as permanent, then all we had to realize is impermanence, because that's in direct opposition to that mind from the point of view of what it apprehends. But here in this case, it's holding on to inherent existence. What is in direct opposition to that mind in terms of what it apprehends? What is in direct opposition to the mind holding on to inherent existence in terms of what it apprehends? What is the mind holding on to inherent existence? What does it apprehend? What does it hold on to? Inherent existence. Which mind is in direct opposition to that in terms of what it apprehends? The mind that realizes the lack of inherent existence, right? That's the direct. So these two minds, the root mind and the direct antidote to all afflictions, the root ignorance and the direct antidote to all afflictions, these two minds have to be in direct opposition when it comes to their main object, right? The root ignorance, it's like if the cause of your problem is perceiving the snake in a cupboard, the only solution is not thinking I have no elephant in the garden, right? Think of the example with the cupboard works really well. You have a cupboard and there's a snake inside. So holding onto the snake, if you want to remove that wrong consciousness that perceives the existence of a snake, thinking there's no elephant in my garden is not going to take care of it, right? Or taking a sleeping pill is not going to take care of it. You need to realize the absence of snake in the cupboard. Oops, sorry. Thought I'll put it on silence. So you need to realize the absence. You need to realize the absence of snake in the cupboard. So likewise here, you need to realize emptiness. Without that, no way. And once you realize emptiness, and emptiness removes now the different layers of ignorance, you don't need to deal with the other afflictions. They just won't arise. Does that make sense? We do say it's the antidote to the other afflictions, but only indirectly. Only indirectly. Once that root misperception is gone, there is no attachment to a self. Because the self, it can only arise, the self-centeredness can only arise based on grasping at an inherently existent I. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's the only solution. But to go back to renunciation, if someone tells me liberation is possible and I don't take it on faith, then I want to know, what is the root of my non-liberated state? Right? What is the root? If I'm non-liberated and I can become liberated, there must be a root cause. If there wasn't a cause, it's like a disease. If a disease has a root cause, then I have hope that it can be removed. If there is no root cause, then there's nothing I can do, right? There's no cause, it just is. It just is. It would be independent of any cause, so it would just be, and I couldn't do anything. But if it has a root cause, I can remove it. Now the question is, does it have a root cause? Yes, it does. What is the root cause? The root misperception. If it is in accordance with reality, if phenomena really existed inherently and they caused all my trouble, couldn't do anything. Couldn't do anything. What would I do with that mind? It's in accordance with reality. I couldn't realize the opposite of it. Right? If phenomena were hypothetically to exist inherently, you couldn't come to realize the lack of inherent existence. That wouldn't exist. It would be impossible. So therefore, I have to then check, is the root cause in accordance with reality or not? And if it's not, then I'm okay. I just need to know the opposite of what this mind perceives, the lack of inherent existence, and all my trouble is solved. But in order to therefore come to understand that I can solve the problem, I have to know that emptiness is in accordance with reality. Because only then can I know that the root misperception is a wrong consciousness. So don't forget this part. I talked about this a few weeks ago. When for those of greater mental faculty, right? Of greater mental faculty, they're those who have to realize emptiness first, because they have to understand that the root ignorance is an incorrect mind. Its object doesn't exist. Does that make sense? Does it or does it not? They have to understand. You have to understand that this root ignorance, there is a root cause for samsara. That is a wrong consciousness, and you can only know it's a wrong consciousness when you know emptiness. Just as you can only know the mind that perceives the snake in the cupboard is a wrong consciousness when you realize the absence of snake. Snake here is inherent existence. Right? So just as there's no snake, there's no inherent existence. Yes?
Can I ask you a question about practical application of this, or do you want to stay sort of in this track?
Let's hear. Let's hear.
So let's imagine that I am actually willing to accept or have realized my own emptiness, and I don't kind of cling to this self. It seems that so many afflictions, such as anger, frustration, sadness, arise when, say, world leaders such as Trump or Netanyahu cause great suffering to other people. And actually, being an American, I'm not one of the ones targeted by their violence. And so it's actually what is happening to other people, and distinctly not what's happening to me, that makes me feel so angry. Now I recognize that that may not be a useful emotion to have, but still, if we say, similar to the Shantideva example, which I love so much, okay, we have to recognize that Trump is afflicted by his own anger, and getting mad at him is as misguided as getting mad at the stick. But then I still feel all sorts of negative emotions or afflicting emotions, such as depression or sadness, even if I don't focus on the perpetrator, but on the suffering that's being inflicted. Can you kind of connect those things? So what is the way to think about that? Because it doesn't appear to be a result, all these negative emotions don't appear to be a result of self-clinging, but if I think, okay, these others lack inherent existence as well, then it sort of seems to make light of the horrible suffering that is being inflicted, that some might say, I actually, as an educated American, have some responsibility to do something about. And then I get also depressed about that, about not being more effective in that. So how to actually apply that?
All right, so he's asking, I have to repeat it. He's asking, how about on a practical level? Like, it needs to be addressed on a practical level, which is, for instance, not getting angry so much in response to what someone does to me personally, but rather what some world leaders are doing right now. So you gave the example of Trump, him being an American, so he's not really affected as greatly as by what Trump does, but a lot of other people are. And so this anger at what he does, right? So in that sense, to think that they all lack inherent existence is just making light of it. It's like not even taking personal responsibility. It's almost like, well, they don't, it's kind of like not that big of a deal, lack of inherent existence, so that doesn't seem right. So there's very little we can do, right? Did I repeat it in the right way? Did I forget something?
Yes. I'm wondering how can we bridge that gap then?
How can we bridge that gap? Yes.
Recognizing the lack of inherent existence that others might have. Yeah.
Right, so how does emptiness help us, in other words, to deal with this? I mean, to deal with our anger and so forth in those times. Okay, all right.
Can I just add something? It's also
Yes.
about being active in a situation like that, rather than being angry about it.
Mhm.
The way you're talking, the way I'm hearing you're talking about it, leads us to say, oh, well, inherent in existence. Shouldn't it be a way of motivating people to demonstrate, to be active in this process? Because we are part responsible.
Yes, so shouldn't it motivate other people? So emptiness, the concept of emptiness, shouldn't it motivate us to become active instead of to just sit back and think phenomena don't exist in that way? So shouldn't it actually motivate us, since we're part of the problem indirectly? You're adding to that, right? But that wasn't your original question, but still that's in follow on. I mean, that's also a follow up on that. I think that's great. I mean, you're putting it onto a practical level, of course. A lot of what we discuss right now is pretty much theory from our perspective. Does anyone want to say something to what those two just said? Do you want to say something? Yeah.
I think for me, the topics we study now of great compassion and the three types sort of relate to it. So even if let's say the second or third types of great compassion seem like very, very high practice, which is not relevant to us at all, like at least I don't think for me, like having two minds at the same time, one grasping, like one having great compassion, the second mind having the realization of emptiness for sentient beings, this is not practice for me today at all. But I still think the concept of like generating compassion based on wisdom, maybe in an indirectly conjoined way, like meditating on impermanence, and then meditating after it on compassion and seeing how the ignorance of beings to impermanence causes the suffering, then it increases my compassion. Like I'm Israeli, and I remember on the 7th of October, that a lot of suffering was due to ignorance of impermanence. Because it's thought that the life looks a certain way, and then this assumption of how life looks just dropped completely. And it felt like the flow was gone. And I was practicing that then a little bit, and then I saw that some of the suffering is because of people like thinking that the reality they're used to will always be the same way. And I think this is like helpful to generating compassion, and this is like I do think is practical on the day to day.
All right. So let me just repeat in a nutshell what you just said. So you're saying you're not on that level of great compassion the way we discuss it. Of course, this is very highly advanced compassion in parallel with, like, directly conjoined with impermanence, but to still you being Israeli. So for instance, what happened in October 2023, 7th of October, so the attacks in Israel, that when you focus, if you generate yourself compassion and at a different time focus on impermanence, it helped you to deal with this in this situation, and you also came to understand that not understanding impermanence and not understanding possibly emptiness and so forth became obvious how that created a lot more suffering. Did I repeat that in the right way?
And that helps me to generate compassion.
It helps you to generate compassion, yes.
I saw other people who were ignorant of impermanence.
Yes, yes.
And this caused them suffering. And this suffering was like like a super like additional.
Yes, so the fact that sentient beings suffer because of not understanding impermanence and emptiness, so that...
My friends.
Pardon?
With my friends.
Your friends, for instance, yeah, so your friends and whoever else, you witnessed their suffering because of what happened, so you generated more compassion for them, understanding them as conception. All right, so having said this is extremely complicated, obviously, right? Not complicated in itself. I mean, the explanations are easy. Our mind is so complicated. Our mind is so complicated. And I agree with what you said, but now bringing it all together, our mind is just extremely, extremely complicated in that we're so accustomed to the afflictions, right? We're just so accustomed to them. So first of all, the injustice that is caused by so many politicians, something His Holiness has said on many occasions, which I think is very beautiful. We don't forgive the action, we forgive the person. And there's even something in there's an explanation His Holiness gives in one of his books where he says, to be angry with the action is not a problem. I mean, this kind of anger with injustice. It's not anger or aggression in the negative sense, like this is not okay. So this sense of, what's a better word than anger? Like the sense of like, that's not all right. It's even a type of anger. That's not a problem. We get angry with the person, right? The actions of the person and the person are seen as one. And we only see that action. That's all we see, right? And that doesn't mean that this person hasn't committed this action. Yes, of course. But this whole meditation we do, for instance, on separating the person and their action and understanding they're under the control of their afflictions. They're under the control of terrible afflictions. I mean, greed and power hunger and whatever else. I mean, I don't know, I can't look into the minds of politicians, but I don't think they're governed by certain politicians by compassion and wisdom. So that is something to consider, to not forgive the action, but I mean, saying forgive the person doesn't mean to condone the actions, but not to have that anger, which harms us, no one else. It doesn't harm them. But that still doesn't make it right what happens to other people, of course. So how to deal with it? I mean, this goes into so many other, there's so many topics in Buddhism. One of them, of course, is karma. Now, that is terrible. It sounds terrible, but right now, people experience, of course, the results of certain actions in the past. Now, this is not saying that this is permanent. Again, this is impermanent. And us doing something may actually, and that's why it's important, because there's karma, we have a responsibility to do something. Because karma is not fixed, it's not inherently existent, and it's certainly not permanent. And it helps a little bit to think, okay, there were causes and conditions that were accumulated, but because they're impermanent, the karmic experiences are impermanent. They won't always last. And they may also have the karma to be helped, which is why we have a personal responsibility to do something, right? So it just helps in our own case if something terrible happens to us. All right, an action in the past, there is a cause, it won't last, and I can find a solution to that because maybe I can remedy the problem, okay? But again, how much can I do? I mean, I won't be able to offer a solution to this, to say, what can I do? I mean, this, we have to individually think, what can we do to stop someone like Trump? Is there something I can do? That's one thing, right? Helping other sentient beings, yeah, we have to think, what can we do to reduce their suffering? I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm sure there's something, but I don't know in this case, going to demonstrate or whatever. But the main problem is, the main issue here, I think your question is how we deal with this on a mental level. What do we do on a mental level? Well, the problem is our anger with the person, not with the action, right? Yes, go ahead.
So that's why I sort of brought up the stick in the Shantideva example.
Yeah.
Let's even forget the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Let's just say when I see this happen,
Yeah.
irrespective of who's done it,
Yeah.
that makes me extremely sad and depressed.
Okay.
And those appear to be afflicting emotions. In what way does understanding emptiness help me deal with that?
Okay, all right. So it's not about the anger with the person, it's just this anger with the action maybe, or not even anger, just feeling very sad and depressed. Okay, great. So we're getting right at the crux of the problem. Feeling helpless and angry or sad and depressed and anxious about these problems. Yeah, a very common, I've been just reading the news, I think it's a common reaction to that. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? That's where it comes down to. So how, it's one way to answer this question would be, how does emptiness help me? But another way to look at it is, how does my misperception of reality cause this? How does the misperception of reality cause that? How about holding on to permanence? Is there possibly a way, because, first of all, okay, also our sense of generalizing. When we say sentient beings suffer, well, that is just a word we use in general for, say, let's say 500 people. But each person's experience is different, right? There seems to be just suffering like we label. Okay, going back to this, you read on the news, so many people suffer in different places, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, Iran. I mean, so many people suffer right now. So it's like suffering. We read that, and it's labeled on the basis of many different experiences. But our mind, to us, it's like this inherent suffering, permanent suffering. And it's like overwhelming. One person's suffering can be overwhelming, but I'm told 10,000, 20,000 suffering. See what our mind does? It labels suffering on the basis of each individual suffering. Already the newspaper does it for us. All the great suffering of 10,000s of people. So we hear one word, suffering, which is labeled on every individual experience. Is there this universal suffering hovering in the world? No, but it feels like it. It almost feels like a dark cloud. And I'm saying this because I have the same experience. I read the news, suffering here, suffering there, suffering over here, or 10,000s of people suffering. And it's like I'm hit by that cloud of suffering, where my mind, as I just said, holds on to a permanent, inherent suffering. But if I think again, there are individual beings. There is no cloud of suffering. Individual experiences. Terrible, of course. But what I created before was a cloud, a permanent cloud. There's nothing I can do. And that sense of helplessness leads to fear and depression. But let's look again. Let's look closer. What is behind that? Experiences that people have right now. And they come and go. They come and go. Right now, take an individual person. Yes, something terrible happened. But let's see 10 years from now. Are they definitely going to experience that? Not necessarily. They may be able to rebuild their life, for instance. Suffering comes and goes. It comes and goes. It may make them extremely compassionate. Help them other beings, right? I mean, not every suffering is always negative just because we don't want it. Well, tell that to me if someone comes to, of course, I don't want it. But the point is, what I'm trying to say is, our depression and anxiety comes from seeing it as something permanent and independent and just negative, right? And we need to look closer. Where is that negativity within the suffering? Is it inherently negative? Can it be something positive? Can it be turned around into something positive, right? Can it be beneficial in some way? Is it changing all the time? Does everyone eventually overcome their suffering and attain the state of a Buddha? So we may not want to look that far in the future, but in the future, everyone will be able to overcome. So if right now it feels like, think in the future it won't be like that, right? That just gives us a little bit more space in the mind. And of course, the way I said previously, everyone's experience is different. It comes and goes. There's conflict in this country right now, 10 years from now on, it's shifted to another country. So to think along these lines as well helps a little bit to lighten it. And if it lightens our mind a little bit, we're not trapped in that depression and that hopelessness, because there is hope. I think it's important to recognize there is hope, and to also recognize this is samsara. That's also a very important point. We're always trying to find nirvana in samsara. We try to find nirvanic solutions, right? What depresses us is our sense that this is not okay, a person caused this, one particular person who's so fortunate right now. Well, we're just seeing a snapshot in the moment. Yeah, right now they seem really happy and they seem on top of the world, the most powerful person in the world, but they're creating incredible suffering for themselves. And to think that they're very satisfied and happy is definitely that's a stretch, I would say. So they're definitely not happy. In their ignorance, they're creating so much suffering for others, but mainly for themselves. Honestly, it's very hard to hate someone like Trump if you think along those lines, right? Really, if you think, out of how much ignorance, I mean, it's so hard to be arrogant and have a huge ego, right? We all know that. But to have an ego like that, I mean, every time I read it, I go, oh God, the poor guy. I mean, it's like, you know, the politicians like, oh, you can patch things up with him. Just praise him. Oh my God. How much ignorance is there? I mean, if all you need to do to patch things up with him, you just compliment him about his hair. Do I want to be Trump? Seriously?
But it's not Trump though, is it? The system has vomited him up.
Yeah, but the system, where's the system? It's individual people driven again by this not knowing what they're doing to themselves. So anger and frustration, I think it can give way to sincere compassion. You know, compassion for the victims, but they're just getting rid of their problem right now. I mean, the karma is experienced and the karma is exhausted. It's terrible, and I don't want it for anyone to happen. But these perpetrators, they're creating the karma for them to come. I mean, they're just starting to experience all the consequences. So I think it's fair to have compassion for both, which still means you discipline one and you protect the other.
There are examples of people, I mean, His Holiness is one that has experienced this great suffering and tragedy of his country, but has managed to remain joyful whilst acknowledging the suffering. You know, when he meets ex-prisoners, he asks them, you know, what did they do to you? He doesn't fail from it, he meets it straight on.
Yes, so His Holiness the Dalai Lama is saying is a good example of someone who does not get trapped in... Yes, so in this incredible suffering, he still keeps a joyful mind. So that's a very good example that you quote His Holiness. So quote His Holiness. I mean, His Holiness is such a good example. He keeps a light and joyful mind. Very important. Understanding that it's the nature of samsara, of course, that there's always suffering. Doesn't mean that this is okay, but it's at least not finding sweetness in salty water, for instance, right? That's an important aspect. So to work in accordance, be in accordance with reality. But then still, on top of that joyfulness and that lightness, he can then deal with other people's problems without being thrown into some kind of depression, because you are of no use to anyone if you're depressed, right? So it's important to work on that lightness. Of course, going back to how do you do this? Focus more on what is the root cause? Our sense of it's always going to be like that and it's inherently terrible. Yeah? And so His Holiness, in so many situations, of course, when he does encounter beings, he has the space in his mind to talk to people and want to hear about their suffering. And he sympathizes with them deeply. I mean, there are many occasions when His Holiness started crying out of sympathy. He wasn't thrown into some kind of depression, but he felt true sympathy for that person. And the person felt it, and they felt their suffering was made lighter through that. Yeah. So it's not about ignoring the suffering by focusing on impermanence and emptiness, but creating a lightness and a space in your mind that helps you to deal with it effectively. Right? But this, unfortunately, is a very long process. That's the only problem. And living in the 21st century, there are a lot of advantages, but one disadvantage is fast food, fast movies, fast internet. We're used to fast, getting faster, faster, faster. The one thing that doesn't get faster is this process.
But I still don't think you can be a spiritual disciple of anyone and not be an activist.
You don't think, yes, okay, so you still think you cannot be a spiritual disciple without being an activist. I agree. I mean, in what way your activism is reflected, in what way you're doing that, but of course you're right. I mean, and this is a problem among Buddhists, honestly. Yes, this is a problem. This is an issue in Buddhism, that some people, I'm just comfortable in my room, I just think, all sentient beings, may they be happy. And in certain situations when something can be done, we don't do it. Because we're comfortable. We have to leave our comfort zone. He doesn't agree. Okay. But you see, it's a little complicated. If we're sincerely practicing at all times, then it's okay. But if we're just sitting around and, and doing a little bit of meditation here and there, and wasting our time just being calm and happy, I think then we can be blamed for that. For someone who sincerely practices or makes the Dharma available, for instance, working all the time to give courses, to organize courses and so forth, for instance, in Tushita, I know for a fact that Venerable Kumbaji hates me doing this now, but I know for a fact she works so hard in Tushita all the time, making the Dharma available to others. So that is an activism. That's a kind of activism. Right? So it's not just about going out and demonstrating and, that's a kind of activism, I would say. But it's easy to just sit back on your mat and do 20 minutes, half an hour every day, do your practice, and then just cook, hang out with your friends and have a good time. Now so it's easy to become complacent, and that's a problem. So as a Buddhist practitioner, we have a responsibility to become activists. I agree with her. I think it's important to become an activist in what am I doing? Am I wasting my time and just enjoying? And I'm not saying every Buddhist is doing that, but there is a danger, and I'm just looking at my own mind, at being just complacent. You don't have an 8-hour job every day. You can regulate your time. No one is going to check up on you. It's very easy to become complacent, and that's a huge problem. Or just accumulate more knowledge, right? So the main point is the motivation. The main point is the motivation. What am I doing this for? Is this benefiting others directly or indirectly? And we all have a responsibility to check. But every activist or so-called activist in the world has to do the same. Because there are a lot of activists that are driven by possibly hatred and aggression. It's not, I think one of the best activists is His Holiness Dalai Lama. Right? Absolutely. So activism is Holiness being a good example. Tirelessly working for others. Yeah? But having taken the Dharma, having studied the Dharma, having taken that as your guiding lamp, if you like, or your guiding light. Did you want to add something to that? I thought you raised your hand.
Be an activist lost in activism.
Yeah, activism being lost in activism. Activism just for the sake of activism. Yes, you wanted to?
Just have some small confusion here.
Yes.
Of course, I agree with the theoretical point that you're saying that if somebody comes to independently,
Mm-hmm.
then we cannot find a cessation to that. So if we only think things are coming through causal conditions, then we can actually find a cessation.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you're actually saying that ignorance is actually the root cause of
Mm-hmm.
suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But no, but that is a theoretical thing that I agree with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are talking practically,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in order to actually cease suffering,
Mhm.
we have to understand the actual causal conditions that are actually causing that particular kind of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So it changes from planet to planet, it changes from tradition to tradition, it changes from mind to mind also.
Mm-hmm.
So in this particular case, there's a whole lot of jargon to actually get out of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that ignorance is actually the root cause of suffering? It is a lack of wisdom that actually is the root cause of suffering. So it's in order to get out of the suffering, you have to do so many things. So just because of contemplating on emptiness, we cannot cause an end to suffering. It's theoretically we can know that because things are coming of causal conditions. Knowing the causal conditions, we can play with it to actually see certain things that we can come to an understanding. But how can we actually thoroughly cease the cause the cessation of suffering and pass to the bodhisattva grounds and go to the 13th ground just by realizing emptiness? That's not possible, right?
How can we, okay, I hope I understood your question right. So you're saying the root cause is ignorance. Okay, so we have to
I'm not
under...
agreeing with that. I'm saying that
You don't agree with that. Okay, so this is the Buddhist assertion that the root cause is ignorance, but you don't agree with this. It doesn't seem that way.
yeah,
it doesn't seem that way.
theoretically it is true because if everything
But what is true?
if everything is coming of causal conditions,
So if everything is dependent on causes and
then
conditions,
cessation is definitely possible.
then cessation is definitely possible because we just have to remove the cause.
Yes,
So the root ignorance is not the main cause.
yes.
Okay, so what is the main cause?
There is no main cause.
There's no main
It is
cause.
coming to so many causal conditions.
There's so many causes and
So
conditions.
we can always play with these things.
So you have to remove all the causes and conditions. If every result is the result of many causes and conditions and there's no single root cause, then basically to find a solution, we have to remove all these causes and conditions.
Not necessarily.
Which cause do you have to remove?
Some things we can remove.
Something, okay, so it's also about not just all causes and conditions, but certain causes, and certain causes can be removed, right? Okay, do you accept that the mental afflictions are a main cause? An important cause? The mental afflictions like anger, aggression, greed, and so forth. Would you agree that of all the problems in this world, one of the main causes are the mental afflictions? Or do you see other main causes?
I mean, they also don't exist from their own side. So on this planet,
Oh, no, but they exist. Whether they don't exist from their own side, they don't exist inherently, but they do exist. Conventionally, they do exist.
it depends on perception. Not every mind may perceive that way. People have not experienced the mental emotions also can still get enlightened.
Okay, but the thing is, no, what I'm trying to say is the mental afflictions, they do exist. Okay, they do exist. So can they be reduced? Yes, they can be reduced. And is there so you don't agree with the root cause? Well, there's not much I can say. So I guess I would say keep an open mind. That is there maybe a possibility that grasping at inherent existence is the root? And of course, there's no reason to believe me, but listen to what the Buddha said, what His Holiness said. For instance, looking at them, especially His Holiness being like a great example. So them telling us the root cause is ignorance at least helps us to keep an open mind, right? But I think it's already very helpful thinking that it's the mental afflictions. But maybe one more thing that is really important. One thing we need to recognize, and it's unfortunately the case, I wish it wasn't the case, that there's only one thing we can truly change. There's only one thing we can truly change, and that is our mind. I mean, activism is important, but look at this Holiness the Dalai Lama. He can only do two things. Teach us through his words and teach us through his example. Now, both are extremely important. So what is the best kind of activism? Work on our own afflictions and not become complacent, right? No, that's what I'm saying. To be an effective Buddhist is to become, first of all, a really good example to others. I mean, I'm saying, like His Holiness, Isn't there anyone? I mean, with His Holiness, it's almost like you don't need to say that much. You spend some time around Him and you get it. Because everything is theory, unless you meet someone like him who embodies the teachings. I remember when I finished my studies, I met Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I hadn't met him in a long time. And I had the strongest feeling thinking, wow, here's an embodiment of everything I studied. And I could see it's all possible. I mean, it all made logically sense to me. It made sense to me, but it was almost like it was just such a perfect time. And it wasn't that I didn't think His Holiness was like that, but it was just at that time when I just got my degree, I met Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and of course, as you know, there was a lot more opportunity to be around Lama Zopa Rinpoche than His Holiness. So His Holiness is just doing the teachings, but there was this opportunity to spend time with Rinpoche at Tushita, watching him with other people, just seeing him interacting, and I was like, wow, there's everything in this person. He lives it. That was so amazing. That was for me really, really beneficial. It convinced me it is possible. So it's through seeing people like him, everything makes sense. Everything becomes a reality. There's wisdom. There is absence of afflictions. There's absence of a self-grasping mind. And there's this boundless love and compassion for others that you feel, you can really feel. We need to become like that. That's the point. Dharma practice, our Dharma practice is becoming like that. Because we have an effect on people that goes beyond anything. Just being in the presence of such a person. So what can we do? It's an activism that is not like, right now I can do something, make a huge difference. Unfortunately, it won't work. We need to work towards becoming that kind of person. Where you walk into a room and people feel calm. This is what these lamas do. This is what these, I don't know whether they're living Buddhas or they're highly advanced Bodhisattvas. One of the two, no doubt. Which one, I don't know. But it shows us that their example is such an inspiration, and it can even do something to our mind, calm our worries and anxiety as they're in the room. I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there are lots of accounts of people who suffer from depression, suffer from anxiety. His Holiness comes in the room and they're fine. Having that effect on people. I mean, His Holiness leaves the room and they're going back, but at least they had a taste of it. This is what we're aiming for, becoming like that. That's just another way of saying becoming like a Buddha, becoming a Buddha. But Buddha, 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 I say it doesn't mean anything. If I say become like His Holiness, it means a lot more to us. So in answer to your question, there's no quick solution. I know exactly what you mean, and it gets better. That's all I can say. It really, really gets better. With everything I've done for the few years, and I'm totally at the beginning, but I've done this a few years now, and I feel I can deal with things better, more lighthearted. I don't get dragged down, anxiety, a thing of the past, waking up in the bad mood, so it really gets better. And that's just the beginning. So wow, what lies ahead is beautiful. But the solution lies in here, and it's all about making it part of yourself. Making it a part of yourself, as these examples have done. The great lamas. That was not what I was planning to do, but it's great you brought that up. This is the practical part. I mean, I really appreciate whenever someone asks these questions, and all of you participated in some way. Just you nodding helped me to realize, yeah, it's all something. Where do we bring it from the theoretical to the practice? Our lamas? That's where the lamas, the root of the path. You know, we feel like, oh, root of the path, the lamas. It's not about like throwing ourselves in front of them and kissing their feet. It's not about that. Seeing that it's possible. Seeing them as an embodiment. And once we see it's possible, we can do it. It shows us that we can do it, however long it's going to take. Right? And that is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. For me personally, like, I know I'm so far away from any kind of Lama, but I know I can do it. Right? Okay. Anyway, should we do a little bit of the text? Okay, let's go back to the text. Page 62. Yeah, this is where we got to. Page 62, so 67 in the PDF, 52 or 53 in the book. It says, we're still talking about, so in case of those who have found the common level view of selflessness or suchness as well. So in case of those who have come to understand commonly accepted selflessness, which is all the philosophical Buddhist schools except this lack of a self-sufficiency of substantially existent self. That's the common level selflessness that everyone accepts. So if you have understood that, you have understood even emptiness, one finds within their mind streams many instances of compassion focused on sentient beings without qualifying them in either of the two ways mentioned above. So you can realize emptiness, but it doesn't mean in every... You still realize table and car and so forth without always understanding their emptiness. Only a Buddha knows in every moment a car and the emptiness of the car. In fact, our mind cannot do both. It cannot know car and the emptiness of the car. Either you know a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. You can never do both. But you can alternate, and that's already very powerful. But here he's saying not in every sense that every time you perceive something, for instance, in many instances of compassion, you may focus on sentient beings without thinking of their impermanence, without thinking of their emptiness, right? Or any other object, like you think of a table without thinking of its emptiness, for instance. So, for example, with respect to someone who has eliminated the object of clinging, grasping at a vase as permanent. So usually we perceive objects such as vases, table, and so forth as permanent. We're not aware of its constant change. So we cling to that kind of permanence. But there can still be, as permanent, and has realized it, who has eliminated, I misread that. So someone who has eliminated, we cling to the impermanence of things, but someone who has eliminated the object of clinging at a vase as permanent, which is just another way of saying having understood that a vase is impermanent. There can still be many instances where this person takes the vase as the focal object, but does not qualify it as a permanent. Right? So you perceive the vase, but you don't necessarily in that moment understand it to be impermanent. Does that make sense? So unfortunately, it would be nice if that were the case, but our mind doesn't do that. So you have understood, vase is impermanent, but then you just perceive good old vase without even understanding its impermanence. And likewise, in the case of those who take the vase as his focal object, but does not qualify it as impermanent, right? And likewise, in the case of those who have not realized the vase to be impermanent, every time they take a vase as their focal object, they need to do so by qualifying it in terms of permanence. They need not to do so by qualifying it in terms of permanence. Sorry, just reading this confused you more. In other words, even though you understand that vase is impermanent, you don't always understand the impermanence of the vase when you perceive vase. Even though you may hold on to the vase being permanent, every time you see the vase, you don't necessarily perceive it to be permanent. Does that make sense? The same applies to emptiness. You may have realized emptiness of all phenomena, and still you perceive just vase, car, and so forth. I mean, existent vase, car, etc. At times when you rise from that mind that realizes the emptiness, you still perceive objects without qualifying them, without understanding their emptiness in each moment, right? And similarly, even though we believe 100% phenomena exist truly, inherently, we don't perceive them every time as such. We can still perceive vases, cars, etc. Without that qualification. Okay. Yeah, so this is just in terms of the three types of compassion. It also therefore shows that despite having had the second type of compassion or the third type of compassion, which means, in other words, you have realized the emptiness of sentient beings, you have realized the impermanence of sentient beings, have brought it together with great compassion, but there may be times when you have only great compassion without any other mind, any wisdom running parallel. That's still possible. Does that make sense? Okay. So then the text reads, these three types of compassion, the same is true here as well. Okay, so that was part of the previous explanation. These three types of compassion are all, regardless of which of the three focal objects they take. So regardless whether they don't focus on anything other than, or they have no other mind running parallel, or whether it's compassion, great compassion conjoined with the wisdom realizing impermanence, or the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, or compassion directly conjoined with the mind realizing emptiness. It doesn't matter which one it is. They're still endowed with the cognitive aspect, wishing to protect all sentient beings from all forms of suffering. This is the clearest quote here, where great compassion, although in the texts, it's often described as a mind that focuses on all sentient beings and wants them to be free from suffering. That is the definition given. But here Lama Tsongkhapa says, protect all sentient beings. Wishes to be able to be of benefit or to help sentient beings overcome suffering. Right? So protect here in the sense, wishes to do something. Not just wishes them to be free from suffering, but wishes to personally contribute to that. This is why great compassion is found in the continuum of a bodhisattva, is found in the continuum of someone inclined towards the universal vehicle path, but not in the continuum of a practitioner of the fundamental vehicle, because they don't take that interest in protecting all sentient beings. Some sentient beings possibly, but not all. For maybe the reason they don't accept it's possible or don't feel they're capable of doing so. In that sense, they're all very different, Lama Tsongkhapa says, from the compassion of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. When such a type of compassion is produced, compassion that wishes to protect all sentient beings, one comes to generate the awakening mind. In other words, first there's the altruistic resolve. Okay, you start up with this wish to protect sentient beings, and that turns into the altruistic resolve, I will protect sentient beings, which then in turn gives way to the logical conclusion, I can only really do something for sentient beings if I first become a Buddha. Which is why, lastly, you generate the awakening mind, aspiring, I will, by all means, attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. It's interesting how it's formulated. I need to go back to the Tibetan. I don't know whether it's in Tibetan done in that way. I mean, I do usually read them together, but I don't always pay attention to the exact difference between the two. Just a sec. It says here, a mind aspiring. Where is it? Oh yes, here. It says here, aspiring, and then I will by all means attain Buddhahood. That seems like a resolve. Aspiring means you wish for something. And then the way it's put in English, I will by all means. Let me just find this. Just a sec. I'm just finding the Tibetan. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. I will. It's got that determination in the Tibetan as well, except it doesn't say aspiring. It says thinking. Literally, it says thinking, I will by all means attain Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So to generate an awakening mind, thinking, I will by all means attain Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Now, Geshe Thupten Jinpa added the word aspiring, which is not wrong, because in the definition, it says a mind that aspires to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, or that focuses on one's own enlightenment, aspiring towards it, basically, right? So, therefore, it is an aspiring mind. But I like the way it's put here. Why? Because it's important, I think, that initially it may be an aspiration, but that grows stronger into determination, right? We have that distinction when we meditate, for instance, on great compassion. It's the aspiration to protect sentient beings, as opposed to the altruistic resolve, which is then the determination to do so, right? So there's this debate that comes up because in the text, like I said, the definition only talks about wishing for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. And there's this whole debate. Like practitioners of the fundamental vehicle, don't they wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering? And it would be ridiculous to say they don't. Of course they wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Like our commentary, for instance, that we use here, it says, hearers in solitude realizers wish for immeasurable sentient beings to be free from suffering. But a lot of scholars disagree with that. A lot of scholars say, no, that doesn't make sense. Immeasurable? Which ones are excluded? Like immeasurable versus all sentient beings? Is there a difference? So all sentient beings are more, immeasurable are less? So are you saying hearers in solitude realizers want for a certain amount of beings to be free from suffering, but for some they don't want? So which ones are excluded? That's a popular debate, right? So they distinguish between these and these people and those people, or these sentient beings and others, and that doesn't make sense. So therefore, there's a commentary I read just before I came here by a great scholar, Geshe Pandit Dawa. I've got it right here. He discusses exactly that, and he quotes a great scholar from Tibet, Genlam Rinpa. He's no longer alive, but many of the elderly great masters nowadays, they were students of this particular master, and he quotes him saying that he actually gives a sutric quote. He gives in one of his writings, he cites a sutra in which he basically, and I can't translate the whole sutra, but basically it says in the sutra that hearers and solitude realizers, they have the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering, but not the wish to protect them. So there's even a sutric quote, right? Yeah, so that shows there's a difference between great compassion of bodhisattvas and the compassion of hearers and solitude realizers. They all equally want for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. However, taking that personal responsibility, wishing to take personal responsibility is different, right? That is great compassion, wishing to protect all sentient beings. Then the argument is, well, then you don't need the altruistic resolve. You already want to protect them. No, but that's not a resolve. First, you just wish to do so as part of great compassion. And then you develop the great resolve, like, I will do this. Then the question arises, you have nothing when it comes to bodhicitta. You should also have bodhicitta, a type of bodhicitta that is an aspiration, and bodhicitta that is a resolve. Should be equally, right? But it doesn't mention that. However, in here, Lama Tsongkhapa says bodhicitta is that mind, our will. So from that, taking it together with the definition that is usually given in other commentaries, talking about aspiring, my sense is first you aspire, you wish, but that grows stronger. It grows stronger to such a degree that it becomes that determination. It is still, the mental function of aspiration is still part of it, but it's nevertheless turns into that determination. So the mental function of aspiration is still associated with it. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't turn into some kind of resolve. I don't know whether that terribly interests you, but it's just something, a kind of debate that could come up. Why don't you have a bodhicitta that is merely aspiring towards Buddhahood versus a resolve? I will definitely do this. Isn't there a difference between the two? Because there's a difference between great compassion and the altruistic resolve. That would be a debate, for instance.
There is aspirational bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta.
Aspirational bodhicitta is called aspirational bodhicitta simply because you haven't taken the vows yet,
Right.
right? But that doesn't mean you cannot be determined. It's just given the name aspiring to bodhicitta. In fact, it's a different word in Tibetan.
Okay.
It's not the same word. The Tibetan word for wishing for all sentient beings to be happy is döba, so to wish. Möba is, you could say aspiring. It's a different verb that is used. In English, it just happens to be the same, right? So wishing on one hand, and aspirational bodhicitta, when we talk about aspirational bodhicitta, it's not the difference between being determined or just wishing to become enlightened. It is bodhicitta where you haven't actually started to work towards enlightenment, which is usually the distinction between the two, especially in the Prasangika school, is after you generate bodhicitta for the first time, right? You haven't taken the bodhisattva vow yet. You have to take the bodhisattva vow. And only when you take the bodhisattva vow, having taken that vow, you're now actively, with that promise, to work towards enlightenment. You've taken the vow in the sense that this is an extra commitment that now you're actually working towards enlightenment. That's why it's called engaging bodhicitta. Now you engage in the activity. Previously it was just wishing to become enlightened or being determined to be enlightened, but you hadn't actively taken the vow yet. But once you take the vow, now you're engaging, now you're moving forward. So in the text it's usually like, you wish for it, or you're, even determined, but you're not doing anything about it. But once you've taken the commitment, that's when it becomes engaging bodhicitta, right? And you cannot take the bodhisattva vow before, you cannot receive the bodhisattva vow before you're bodhisattva. You can take it. It's a good thing to take it. By all means, if you have the opportunity to take the bodhisattva vow, do it. But one of the most important vows as part of the bodhisattva vow is don't let go of bodhicitta. If you don't have bodhicitta, you've got nothing to let go of. Right? It's one of the main vows. You're not allowed to you lose your bodhisattva vow if you let go of bodhicitta. If you don't have bodhicitta in the first place, how can you break that vow? Right? Okay, anyway, that's a different matter. But the point is, therefore, it's aspirational bodhicitta has a different meaning here. Yeah, it's a good point, but the thing is, it's just confusing because the terminology is the same. Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between the compassion of self-realizers and the compassion of bodhisattvas and the altruistic intent?
Okay.
It sounds quite similar.
Oh, right. So
it doesn't sound like we have three distinct compassions.
So it doesn't sound like there's a difference between the compassion of a hero and solitary realizer and a bodhisattva.
No, and the altruistic intent.
Yes.
I see
Okay.
two, but I don't see three.
All right. So first of all, the altruistic resolve. I think that's a better word, or it just shows that resolve. I think it's a better term. But the thing is, a hero or solitary realizer wishes for all sentient beings to be free from samsara. Wishes for all sentient beings to be free from samsara. That's the same, right? But doesn't feel it's possible personally to help sentient beings to do that, to protect them from, right? Doesn't have that sense they can personally do something, either because it may not be realistic, they may not think it's realistic, depending on their philosophical view, or they may not believe that they can do it. A bodhisattva equally wishes for all sentient beings to be free from samsara, but feels, I can do something. I want to do something. I want to personally protect all sentient beings. See the difference? That's huge. One is taking personal responsibility, the other isn't. And great compassion is the wish to do so. But that then needs to turn into the resolve. I will do something. You need that incredible courage to do so. So just wishing is not enough. Wishing, as part of wishing to help sentient beings overcome samsara, to I will do this. That's the difference.
So first is you wish to somehow be free from suffering, of a solitary residence,
You wish for somehow.
somehow.
And then you go, but how? So the altruistic resolve is, whatever, I don't know how at this point, but I want to. I wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Or you may already know about Buddhahood, of course, I don't know. But you're not determined yet to become a Buddha. So you wish, you then generate, you focus then on Buddhahood. I really want to become a Buddha. I want to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Yeah.
But then the compassion of solitary residence is somehow we will be free, and with compassion of...
Pardon? Say the first thing again. Somehow what?
The compassion of solitary residence,
Yeah.
that I wish somehow sentient beings will be free, and then the compassion of the great compassion is I wish I will do something.
Yes, exactly.
Then the altruistic
The difference between...
determination is I will do something actually
Yes.
because I will free.
Yes, so the difference, therefore, what you just said, exactly. Solitary heroes and solitary realizers just wish all sentient beings to be free from suffering without contributing, without wishing to contribute. I mean, helping one or two, of course, but not all. Don't feel that it's possible. Bodhisattvas feel all sentient beings. I want to do it. And that is compassion, great compassion, and it then turns into the altruistic resolve, right? I will do it. Does that make sense? Exactly as you said. Does that explain
Yeah,
it?
thank you.
Okay. Did you want to ask something? No? Okay, I thought I saw a hand raised. No. Okay. All right. Then go back. Let's go back. As for the compassion that is the object of salutation here, although it is the initial stage compassion that is primary, other instances of a bodhisattva's compassion are included within it as well. So here in this text, it talks about great compassion for 4 verses. It pays homage to great compassion. But in actuality, according to the commentaries, for instance, the auto commentary, it also, although it explicitly talks about initial compassion, it also includes, of course, the compassion of bodhisattvas. Yeah, so there's thus no contradiction. So other instances of a bodhisattva's compassion are included within it as well. Both are mentioned. So of course, when you say, for instance, in the beginning compassion is important, in the beginning, like water when you add it to the soil, so like a seed that is planted in the soil, like water that is, in the middle it's important, and in the end it's important. In the middle, that's already a bodhisattva's great compassion. So it mainly talks about, great compassion in the beginning, but both are actually implied here. So there's thus no contradiction for the commentary describing in some contexts, such as here, the person who's generating the compassion to be a bodhisattva. So in this case here, the commentary. So a lot of what Lama Tsongkhapa says here is actually the commentary, the auto commentary. If you read this text, you understand the entire auto commentary, because it basically quotes the entire auto commentary and just adds words to it. It basically, so if you read Lama Tsongkhapa, then you go back to the auto commentary, you completely understand it. Unfortunately, it hasn't been translated yet. I wish Geshe Thupten Jinpa were to translate it, to use the same words, because otherwise you don't recognize the... I did try actually. There was one passage, I wanted to quote it in class, and I never did it actually. And in the end, it didn't seem important enough. But it was so hard to use Geshe Thupten Jinpa's translation. I just used that, and then to cross out the words that were not in the auto commentary. It would have been so much easier to just translate it myself, but I didn't want to do that because I wanted to see how this commentary reflects the auto commentary. But even if Geshe Thupten Jinpa were to translate it, he'd have a hard time. You have to go back again. Which word is not in the auto commentary? That takes much more time than, yeah, so it would have almost been easier if you translated the auto commentary first and then did this, because then it's just about adding. But I think deleting words is harder. Anyway, but know this, even if the auto commentary, and that's maybe why it hasn't been translated yet. There is a draft copy available, but it's just that, a draft. But it's actually not necessary having Laban Tsongkhapa's text, because it's all there. At least the most important parts are definitely there. All right. Suppose one asks, are all three types of compassion present with respect to the compassion that is the cause of the bodhisattva who has first entered the path? Okay, so there's someone who is first, even before entering the path. So before you've become a bodhisattva, you generate great compassion, right? So can you have all three types of compassion? What do you think? Can you have all three types of compassion before becoming a bodhisattva? Can you have, of course, the first type? That's pretty obvious, you can. Can you have compassion that is directly conjoined with the mind that realizes impermanence? Yes. Can you have compassion that is directly conjoined with the mind that realizes emptiness? Yes. Right? Because those of greater spiritual or greater mental faculty, they realize emptiness before they even generate compassion, great compassion. Because there are two so therefore there are two possibilities. There are those of the Mahayana lineage who follow by way of understanding reality, those of greater spiritual capacity or mental capacity. They first seek the understanding of perfect suchness and then, following their successful establishment of the ultimate truth, generate great compassion for other sentient beings to induce the awakening mind. So you see, you have to realize emptiness even before bodhicitta. Laban Tsongkhapa says it, before great compassion. Right? So great compassion precedes bodhicitta. Previously we've learned, before bodhicitta, the person who of greater mental faculty realizes emptiness before generating bodhicitta. But even before generating bodhicitta, they generate great compassion, and that is also preceded by the realization of emptiness. Simply because you want all sentient beings to be free from samsaric suffering, is it possible? Is it possible for all sentient beings to be free from samsaric suffering? Is it possible I free them? Yeah, that's the aspiration as part of great compassion. Well, can the root be removed? Is the root cause, which is the misconception, a correct mind or not? Is it an incorrect mind? Well, understanding that it's an incorrect mind is understanding emptiness. Remember? Its object doesn't exist, means you have to understand emptiness. Therefore, even before great compassion, you realize emptiness. So that's, again, here what Laban Tsongkhapa says. Then they train in the bodhisattva deeds. So this is only those of greater spiritual capacity, greater mental faculty. Then they train in the bodhisattva deeds, which constitute the conduct of a sage. In contrast, so they're not worldly beings, but sages. So sage here, like a person of special wisdom. In contrast, there are those of the Mahayana lineage, or the lineage of the universal vehicle, who follow by way of faith. So who are inclined towards the universal vehicle, but they follow by way of faith. And it's not that it's better to be a person of greater spiritual capacity, but it's not like saying, if you have a choice, only choose one or don't do anything. I mean, it's still valuable. You have those two choices. So then they train in the bodhisattva deeds, which constitute the conduct of a sage. In contrast, there are those of this lineage who follow by way of faith. They are not able to realize suchness first. In the wake of generating the awakening mind, they then train in the deeds that include seeking the understanding of perfect truth. So they generate bodhicitta first, and then they deal with emptiness. Does that make sense? Right? So those who generate before great compassion, they understand emptiness, they make an effort. And then there are those who make an effort in generating great compassion first, bodhicitta, and then once they're on the path, they have to realize emptiness in order to progress further on the Mahayana path. Does that make sense? Or the path of the universal vehicle, the universal path. They're not able to, in the wake of generating the awakening mind, they then train in the deeds of a bodhisattva that includes seeking the understanding of emptiness or perfect truth. And then Chantarakshita, this is the quote, is always given. This quote is always given in our commentaries when it describes the difference between a person of sharper faculty and less sharp faculty, or those following reality and those following faith. This is Chantarakshita's ornament of the middle way, Madhyamika Alamkara. First searching for perfect understanding and ascertaining thoroughly the ultimate truth, they then generate great compassion. For the world enveloped in destructive views and become heroic in working for others. So, great compassion for the world enveloped in destructive views and become heroic in working for others. So they generate great compassion for the world that is basically mired in constructive views, and bodhisattvas become, and these practitioners become heroic in working for others. So first they understand emptiness, then they could generate great compassion. These wise ones, for whom the mind of awakening flourishes, engage perfectly in the conduct of the sages, which is adorned with wisdom and compassion. So those are of great mental faculty. Then the other ones, those who follow by way of perfect faith, first generating the mind for full awakening, they embrace the conduct of the sages and then seek perfect understanding. Those are the two possibilities. So as stated above, one can identify cases where all three types of compassion are produced prior to entering the path. So with this it becomes clear. With someone who has found the view of suchness first too, not only is there no contradiction in his continuing to establish the truth of suchness and training in it, even during the period of training in the bodhisattva deeds. That is in fact precisely how he must proceed. So even though you realize emptiness before you generated compassion and great compassion and bodhicitta, you still need to continue working on your understanding of emptiness. Yeah? In the case of the person following faith, they basically don't pay that much attention to emptiness. They focus more on great compassion and bodhicitta, and then have to do the work when it comes to emptiness. Those who understood emptiness before generating or developing great compassion and bodhicitta still have to go back to emptiness and just deepen their understanding. Okay. Having made salutation, having paid homage in the above manner, no explicit promise to compose the work follows here in the root text. Now in a lot of texts there is a promise, I will compose the text, but not in this text. A promise to compose the text. Have you? Yeah. Well, for instance, but this is not a flaw, this is not a fault. It is not unlike Nagarjuna's fundamental verses on the middle way. So in the fundamental wisdom, it only pays homage to great compassion, basically. I mean, saying, what is it? It says, the Sublime One, I prostrate to the perfect Buddha, the Sublime One who taught that that which is dependent arising does not cease, does not arise, is not annihilated, is not permanent, does not come, does not go, is not different, is not the same, and is peaceful, free from fabrication. We all know these two verses, right? They're recited a lot at the beginning of His Holiness' teachings, at least in the past. They were always recited. To paying homage to dependent arising, paying homage to emptiness. So there's no promise to, and then it starts, nothing arises from itself, nothing arises from something others, not from both, and not without a cause. So there's no promise to compose the text. Then you have the Rigpa Trungchuba, or as it's called here, the 60 stanzas of reasoning. Again, homage to the great sage who taught dependent origination, the means by which are eliminated arising and destruction. That's all it says. No promise to compose the text. In other types of texts, so 60 stanzas of reasoning is also by Nagarjuna. Both texts only have an homage. And then in other types of texts, such as the friendly letter, or letter to a friend, friendly letter, the promise to compose the text is found, but there's no explicit salutation verse. So it's basically saying, people listen well, like letter to a friend, like listen well to what I'm going to say. So in that sense, it's like seen as a promise to continue to say what he's going to say, right? So it's like a promise to compose the text, but it doesn't have an homage. There's no explicit salutation verse. Since it's with the intention to compose entering the middle way that the homage is made here, the promise to compose the text is implicitly present as well. So by paying homage to compassion, indirectly paying homage to compassion, therefore implied is that we also compose the text. So it's fine that there is no promise. Okay. All right. I'm purposely not doing the very last bit, the very last paragraph. It just talks about something we'll go into on Thursday, and we start the new section then. But your homework, not to forget, he asked a question that I never addressed. Venerable Lobsang, yes. And I want you to see what you think. We talked about bodhisattvas can be followers of the different schools, of the Vaibhashika and of the other schools, yeah. Could there be non-Buddhists? Could you have a non-Buddhist bodhisattva? Could you have so you said Christian, he said a Christian, he mentioned a Christian. Can you have, this is your homework, to figure out, can you have a non-Buddhist bodhisattva? Okay. And what does it mean to be a Buddhist? That's, of course, that's important. And is there a difference between a Buddhist and a Buddhist philosopher? Right? Is there a difference or is there not? There's a difference between being a Buddhist and a Buddhist philosopher, actually. And the answer lies in that. A Buddhist philosopher and a Buddhist.
Is that a Buddhist philosopher or a philosopher of Buddhism?
A Buddhist philosopher, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Either way, it's just turning it. I would say in Tibetan, I'm thinking of the Tibetan, so there is a distinction between a philosopher of Buddhism, a Buddhist philosopher, versus a Buddhist. There's a distinction. So that's one thing to figure out. What's the difference between the two? And can a non-Buddhist become a Buddhist? Can a non-Buddhist enter the Mahayana path, become a bodhisattva, without realizing emptiness, of course, but that's not required to become a bodhisattva, as we've heard, right? Okay, great. And your meditation? Well, we're coming to the end of great compassion. Do compassion the way I've gone through it, focusing on the impermanence of sentient beings, focusing on the emptiness of sentient beings. Yeah, so if you have the interest to do what Lama Tsongkhapa says, not become Angu Parrot, Angu Netsu, then it may be helpful to make some time, yeah, and do the meditations. Great. All right, then all that's left is to dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated. We have accumulated by thinking, well, first of all, may all that positive potential become a cause for us to enter the Bodhisattva path very soon, engage in the Bodhisattva deeds to then eventually, and hopefully soon, for the benefit of all sentient beings, become a fully enlightened Buddha. And may it be an important cause for our great lamas, the embodiments of the Dharma, to have very long lives. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all other great masters to have long and healthy lives, so that they can continue to guide us through their examples and their teachings. And finally, may whatever positive potential we've accumulated become a cause for all the beings, those politicians in the world, driven, especially those driven mainly by the mental afflictions, for these mental afflictions to be reduced and replaced by more loving kindness and wisdom. So with this in mind, let's recite the prayers. In the snow and circled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Denzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. The brave Manjushri and also Samantabhadra realize things as they are. Hence, in order to be able to follow their example, I dedicate these merits in the best way. With the dedication praised the Supreme by the victorious ones of the three types, I completely dedicate all these roots of virtue so that I might engage in the noble Bodhisattva deeds. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.